The world is waking up, whether it wants to or not, to a reality that the mainstream press barely has the language to describe. 500 Geran-3 drones, not a rumor, not a leak from a disgruntled intelligence analyst buried in a footnote. 500 of Russia's most sophisticated jet-powered kamikaze strike machines flowing into Yemen, reaching the hands of the Houthis, pointing themselves at the Red Sea, the jugular vein of global commerce. And if you think this is just another news story about drones and desert fighters, then you haven't been paying close enough attention to the board game being played above your head right now. Let's slow this down, because this story matters to every single American paying rent, buying groceries, filling up a gas tank, and wondering why the price of everything just keeps climbing. What you are watching unfold in the narrow waterway between Yemen and Djibouti is not a regional skirmish. It is the physical manifestation of a new world order being born through fire, and Russia just handed the midwife a very dangerous set of tools. The Geran-3 is not just a drone, it is a message. It is Moscow's fingerprint pressed firmly into the soft clay of Middle Eastern geopolitics, saying clearly and without apology, the old rules are finished. The American era of controlling global shipping lanes through raw naval dominance is being actively, systematically, and ruthlessly challenged. And the challenge is not coming from some future war. It is happening right now in real time as you read this. Russia's drone warfare strategy has entered a new phase in 2025, combining mass Geran drone strikes, jet-powered UAVs, and emerging capabilities that have been battle-tested and continuously refined through operational feedback in Ukraine. Everything the Russians learned from those tens of thousands of sorties over Ukrainian cities, every modification, every software update, every navigation upgrade, all of that hard-won battlefield knowledge is now being packaged and transferred, first to Iran and then through Iran's Revolutionary Guard Corps into the mountains and coastlines of Yemen. This is not accidental. This is architecture. This is the deliberate construction of a multi-front pressure campaign designed to stretch American power to its breaking point. Think about the geography for a moment, because that is where the story really lives. The Bab el-Mandeb chokepoint, a narrow passage that connects the Red Sea to the Gulf of Aden, is irreplaceable in global trade, and disruption there has a disproportionate economic impact. This is the throat of the world economy. Roughly 12% of global seaborne oil trade passes through this corridor, which also serves as a key gateway for cargo moving between Europe and Asia through the Suez Canal. When you close that throat, or even just tighten it, you are not just slowing down ships. You are adding days to delivery schedules, hundreds of millions to insurance premiums, and cents to every price tag in every American store. Freight rate increases of 100 to 350% on primary Asia-Europe and Asia-Mediterranean routes occurred during peak disruption, and the global supply chain cost increase reached an estimated $15 to $20 billion annually. That inflation didn't come from nowhere. It came from a few hundred drones in the hands of a movement that most American policymakers couldn't locate on a map 3 years ago. Now understand what the Geran-3 actually is, because the technical reality here is inseparable from the strategic picture. The Geran-3 is not a simple rebranding of the Iranian Shahed 238, but a heavily modified version tailored for Russian combat requirements, reaching speeds between 550 and 600 kilometers per hour and capable of accelerating up to 700 kilometers per hour in attack dives. Compare that to the slow buzzing Geran-2 that Ukraine's air defenses learned to intercept, the drone that sounds like a moped and flies like a lawnmower. The Geran-3 is something else entirely. While most loiter munitions use relatively inexpensive propeller-driven engines, the Geran-3 is jet-powered, making it significantly faster and potentially more maneuverable, and it comes equipped with electronic warfare countermeasures that make it more difficult to jam. You cannot stop it with machine guns. You cannot reliably jam its navigation. And if you want to intercept it with a missile, you are burning through expensive hardware to stop something that costs a fraction of your interceptor. That asymmetric cost equation is the entire point. Houthi drones and missiles are low cost, while the Western defensive interception and naval deployment required are much higher cost. Russia understands this perfectly. It exploited the same logic in Ukraine and watched the West exhaust billions in air defense budgets, chasing cheap Iranian-designed loitering munitions. Now that template is being exported to a theater where the economic stakes are arguably even higher. The Geran-3 is Russia's localized version of the Iranian Shahed 238 jet attack drone, flying at 300 to 370 kilometers per hour in cruise mode, with an estimated operational range of up to 1,000 kilometers, and Ukraine's intelligence directorate identified 45 foreign-made components inside the airframe, with roughly half coming from American manufacturers. Read that again slowly. Half the components in Russia's most advanced attack drone, the drone now headed to Yemen, come from American companies. 8 from Chinese firms, 7 from Switzerland. The global supply chain, built by decades of open trade and the assumption of a rules-based international order, is now literally assembling the weapons being used to dismantle that very order. It is one of the most profound ironies of our time, and almost nobody in Washington is talking about it honestly. The Houthis have been receiving intelligence from Russia, assisting the Iran-backed group in targeting commercial shipping in the Red Sea, with Russian satellite data being used through a chain that runs through Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps personnel embedded with the Houthi leadership. A brigadier from the IRGC Quds Force sits on the Houthi Jihad Council as deputy to its leader, and a second IRGC member sits on the council with particular responsibility for drones and missiles, receiving intelligence fed through Russian sources, including long-range drones and Iranian naval vessels permanently stationed in the Red Sea area. So, we are not talking about a vague geopolitical alignment here. We are talking about an integrated command and intelligence architecture connecting Moscow's satellites to Tehran's revolutionary guards to Houthi launch sites on the Yemeni coast. That is a military network. That is a coalition. And it is operating in the same waterway where American destroyers have been spending hundreds of millions in interceptors to protect container ships carrying goods to American ports. Russia is attempting to leverage the Houthi movement's power in Yemen and its ability to threaten Western economic and geopolitical interests. And as long as the warfare in Ukraine continues, Yemen, the Red Sea, and the Gulf of Aden will probably continue to grow in importance as a flashpoint in Russia-NATO hostilities. This is the master key to understanding what is happening. Russia is not fighting one war. Russia is fighting a distributed war across multiple theaters simultaneously, using proxies, intelligence, cheap weapons, and the leverage of chokepoints to drain Western resources, attention, and political will. Ukraine is the visible front. Yemen is the invisible one. And the invisible front may ultimately be the more consequential one because its effects land directly on the American consumer in a way that a contested city in eastern Ukraine does not. Russia is sending a shipment of drones to Iran, including upgraded versions of the drone technology that Tehran originally supplied to Moscow after its invasion of Ukraine, with Russian and Iranian officials having had very active discussions this month regarding transferring drones from Russia to Iran. Notice the direction of the transfer. Iran gave Russia drones. Russia upgraded them. Russia is now sending improved versions back to Iran. The technology has been upgraded through the crucible of the Ukrainian battlefield, sharpened by tens of thousands of combat sorties, and is now returning to its original geographic theater in a deadlier form. This is a technology transfer loop, and it operates at a speed and scale that Western export controls and sanctions regimes were simply not designed to stop. By late 2025, NVIDIA Jetson AI processors were being integrated into Geran-2 units, giving them autonomous target recognition and GPS-denied operation, transforming what began as a simple flying bomb into a semi-intelligent weapon capable of identifying and attacking targets without any external guidance signal. When you combine that artificial intelligence targeting capability with the speed and electronic warfare countermeasures of the Geran-3, and you deploy 500 of them along the world's most critical shipping lane, you are not deploying a weapon. You are deploying a message written in the language of force. US and allied forces carried out hundreds of strikes on missile launchers, drones, radar systems, and other Houthi infrastructure across Yemen in an effort to restore freedom of navigation through the Red Sea. But the campaign degraded parts of the group's capabilities without fully eliminating the threat, as shipping companies continued to avoid the route due to ongoing security risks. Hundreds of strikes, hundreds. And the Houthis are still there. The drones are still there. The Red Sea is still functionally disrupted. Red Sea and Bab el-Mandeb transits in 2025 fell to around 35 to 40% of 2023 volumes, and Suez Canal traffic in early 2026 remains roughly 60% lower than before the diversions began. That is a staggering number, 60% lower. The Suez Canal, one of the most strategically important waterways in human history, running at less than half its normal capacity, not because of a natural disaster, not because of technical failure, but because a relatively small armed movement armed with cheap drones and Russian satellite intelligence has made transit too dangerous and too expensive for most commercial shipping operators. and now 500 Geran-3s are entering that equation. Houthi leaders, in coordination with Iran, have framed the potential escalation as part of their response to US and Israeli military operations against Iran and its allies, warning they could target shipping or restrict access to the Red Sea if the conflict intensifies. Yemen's Iran-aligned Houthis announced that they will join the war if Israel or the United States uses the Red Sea to attack Iran. The conditions for escalation are now fully loaded. The Houthis have the weapons, the intelligence network, the political mandate, the ideological motivation, and now 500 of the most capable drones Russia has ever produced. The only thing separating the current tense standoff from a full-scale maritime crisis is a decision made in Sana'a or Tehran, and that decision is now dramatically easier to make because the cost-benefit calculation has fundamentally shifted. The Houthis can now impose costs that dwarf their own exposure. Moscow has been drifting toward the Houthis since the rebel movement's attacks on commercial shipping and appears positioned to use this support as leverage in negotiations with the West. This is the part that American audiences need to sit with. Russia is not doing this purely out of ideological solidarity with the Houthi cause. Russia is doing this because the Houthis represent a magnificent piece of strategic leverage. Every ship that diverts around the Cape of Good Hope adds 10 to 14 days and enormous costs to global trade. Every interceptor missile the US Navy fires defending a container ship is a missile that costs $2 million to chase a drone that costs $50,000. Every carrier strike group the Pentagon deploys to the Red Sea is a carrier strike group not available for the Taiwan Strait, not available for the Baltic, not available for wherever the next crisis erupts. Russia understands the mathematics of imperial overstretch better than almost any power on Earth, having experienced it themselves in Afghanistan and in the Soviet economic collapse. They are now applying that understanding as strategic doctrine. Russia may also have helped Houthi attacks on shipping in large measure to keep the United States entangled in the region and draw resources and attention away from Moscow's grinding war in Ukraine, which is what analysts at the Carnegie Russia Eurasia Center and other major think tanks have confirmed as a core element of Putin's strategy. The wars are connected. Ukraine and Yemen are not separate files on a bureaucrat's desk. They are two pressure points being squeezed simultaneously by the same strategic hand. And while Washington debates aid packages and sanction regimes and carrier deployments, Moscow is quietly, methodically building a global disruption infrastructure that leverages every fault line, every proxy, every choke point, every grievance in the international system. Even if the current situation is relatively calm in the Red Sea, the underlying incentive structure for renewed maritime disruption persists and threats continue to increase. With a single successful Houthi strike on a high-value commercial vessel capable of triggering renewed US or allied airstrikes inside Yemen, rediverting global shipping flows, and forcing insurers to re-rate the corridor, 500 Geran-3 drones dramatically raises the probability of that single successful strike. Dramatically. And the consequences flow immediately and directly to gas prices, to consumer goods prices, to energy markets, to the cost of living for every working American family. This is not abstract geopolitics. This is the mechanism by which the conflicts of distant deserts and narrow waterways reach into your wallet. A weapon that began as an Iranian design, manufactured in Russia, used against Ukraine, and now replicated and improved and distributed across multiple theaters, is perhaps the most remarkable illustration of how drone technology proliferates in the modern era. We are watching the emergence of a new kind of warfare, diffuse, cheap, asymmetric, technologically sophisticated enough to defeat traditional defenses, but economically priced to be deployed in vast numbers that exhaust even the richest military budgets. And at the center of this new warfare is a geopolitical alignment that Washington spent 30 years insisting could never happen. Russia, Iran, and China operating in coordinated strategic interest, not because they love each other, but because they share a common objective: the dismantling of American-led global order, the redistribution of power, the end of the unipolar moment. 500 Geran-3 drones in Yemen, count them. Each one is a data point in the most consequential geopolitical transformation of the 21st century so far. The question for Americans is not whether this matters. It obviously matters. The question is whether the people making decisions in Washington are capable of seeing the whole board, the full strategic picture, the connected architecture of pressure and proxy and choke point that their adversaries have assembled with patient, deliberate, and increasingly effective skill. Because the game being played right now in the Red Sea is not a game where showing up late, spending more money on interceptors, and launching a few hundred airstrikes constitutes a strategy. That approach has already been tried. The shipping lanes are still closed, the drones are still flying, and now there are 500 more of the deadliest ones on the planet pointed at the world's economic lifeline, courtesy of Moscow.